Hey Gators, my name is Lesica Chinwemba and I'm majoring in International Studies here at Bishop University. I'm also a first year representative for PISA, and for International Women's Week, we wanted to highlight some of the incredible women here at BU. We had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Martin-Brûlé, a professor here at Bishop that teaches, among other courses, the Model United Nations Practicum. Dr. Sarah Myriam Martin-Brûlé is an associate professor in the Political and International Studies Department and non-resident fellow at the International Peace Institute. She is an associate faculty member of the Center for International Peace and Security Studies and of the Montreal Center for International Studies. Her expertise focuses on peace operations, the United Nations, and civil war. In 2018, Dr. Martin-Brûlé was the recipient of the William and Nancy Turner Teaching Award here at BU and was also named the 2018-2019 Fulbright Canada Research Chair in Peace and War Studies at Norwich University. Most recently, Dr. Martin-Brûlé has launched a podcast which she is co-hosting with Thomas Juneau. Conseil de Sécurité is the first francophone podcast in Canada focusing on security and defense issues and has hosted so far important figures such as the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, and the Honorable Bob Rae, Ambassador of Permanent Representative Designate of Canada to the United Nations in New York. Lastly, she has led several highly successful model UN delegations from Bishop University and is known for her outstanding devotion to student success and student learning opportunities. We hope you take the time to listen to Dr. Martin-Brûlé, an incredibly successful woman that we are proud to have in our department. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Martin-Brûlé. Thank you so much for agreeing of meeting with us. We're really happy to have you with us. So as an all-female peace executive team, we are very happy to have the opportunity to highlight the success and achievement of our female professor in our department. So I will let Victoria start with our first question.
To begin, can you tell us a little bit about your education and your current area of research?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and what a pleasure to have this discussion today on the gender aspect of our work and of our studies. I did my undergraduate degree and postgraduate studies in political science. I did my bachelor's degree with a year at Université Laval and then a year at Université Montréal. And then I did an exchange in Sciences Po in Lille in France. And then I did my master's at Université Montréal and my PhD at McGill. And my main area of interest has remained intrastate wars and peace operations. And now I'm working even more specifically on peacekeeping intelligence at the United Nations.
Are there any defining moments that made you realize that you wanted to focus on your field of research in peace and security?
There are so many defining moments, and thinking about those questions, I had so much fun trying to sift out what were really eye-opening instant in which that not only sparked interest but also reaffirmed my desire to pursue on those studies. And I think I could start with one eye-opening experience during my PhD fieldwork. So I did my PhD at McGill, as I said, and I was studying the role of deterrence in peace operations. And to study the role of deterrence, I went on the field to meet with belligerents, so with fighters, to try to understand their perceptions of external interveners. So I went there and met different actors, so academics, researchers, but also some general that had been involved in peace missions. And that was in 2008. And in that time, there was, of course, there was internet, but not as widespread as today. And it's by speaking to people and asking them who should I contact next in order to answer my questions that I was given the phone number of a belligerent, of a warlord who was hiding. I'm saying quote unquote hiding, because of course, if I found him, he was easily findable, but who was being a refugee in the country in which I was. So I took the phone number and I called the number, and there was this voice on the other hand inviting me to interview him the next day. It was 45 minutes away from the capital. So the next day, I woke up early, wrote a letter to my mom, left it on my bed, gave the address and the phone number that I was given, and I took a motorcycle. Hopefully my daughters won't listen to that podcast anytime after this interview, but took a motorcycle and went 45 minutes away from the capital to meet that general, that warlord. So I arrived, it's 45 degrees, it's very humid, it's not a jungle, it's a village, but it's exotic enough for a white Canadian student. And I arrived in a quasi-empty house, and there's this lady greeting me, and she's leading me to who she refers to as the general. And I arrive in the general's office, what seems to be his office, very empty, except for a large table, a telephone. So there was no cellular phone, so a telephone, and a human rights watch report on his desk. And the man was very impressive in terms of what he looked like. He was very, very tall, very loud voice, and he was actually exactly how I pictured him. A very robust, large general commander with a loud voice who greeted me. But what I did not expect is the extent to which that man was a gentleman, was polite, nice, savvy, and then started what would turn out to be a 5 hours interview with him. Throughout the 5 hours, first of all, he talked to me in the same words that I was using in my PhD thesis. He talked to me in terms of great powers, in terms of deterrence, in terms of international relations. So the same type of wording that I was using in my thesis, he would use them. He had also put the Human Rights Watch report on his table because he knew I would have read it. And indeed, I had read it prior to meeting him. And that's why I was so excited to meet him as well, because I knew he was one of the main actors, one of the main perpetrators of massive violation of human rights. And he said, I know you wrote it, or not you wrote it, I know you read it, and I can tell you that the report is true. I did all that. But now I want to explain to you, I want to provide you with context of why I did all that. And you need to understand my point of view and our point of view of our group for doing those exactions. While he was explaining me the context, the phone rang, and he became all very anxious. One of his wife was telling him that his younger son of about 18 months had probably a tooth infection. And she was very worried, and he became very worried, asking questions. Does he have fever? How is he? Did he eat? What's happening? Like a normal father would do, or a normal mother would do, a normal parent would do. And then he hangs up and he said, this is really worrying because, as you know, we don't necessarily have access to healthcare. So if the little one has an infection, how will we treat him? And he was very anxious about the situation of his son. And this image of this big general being completely unsettled by his 18-month son having a tooth infection while looking at the Human Rights Watch report that detailed all of his exactions gave me a flash. Like, and this is the complexity of going into the fieldwork. By all the details of the exactions, I had in front of me a monster, right? Because he had led massive rapes, massive attacks, torture. He had done all that. At the same time, the man was gentle, polite, and acting exactly like a normal parent. And that really brought out the gray zones between, wanting to find a monster and finding a savior at the same time. And this to me was an illuminating moment of, this is what monsters look like. It's us, it's everybody. Not everybody does exaction and massive and a massive rate, but this is the complexity of those actors who do actions for a reason, but that does not only define them. Many things define many actors in giving their perception. So that was certainly one moment that was defining in wanting me to better understand those actors, their perception, and what leads them to commit those atrocities. And the second moment for me was research in refugee camps in the contested region in Ethiopia, that is in the Ogaden region. And this is near the Somali borders. And I interviewed Somalis that had been in the war in the 1990s. And you arrive in this refugee camp. So first of all, it's in the desert areas, it's packed. And the houses, they're not really houses, right? They're tents, and they're not even tents. They're tissues, if you will, that are brought together, blankets, covers that are amongst branches and that provide them with some kind of shelter. On the ground in front of many of those shelters, tents, were sticks of woods that would limit the area of each, as if replicating houses or backyards. And people would stay in their location among the branches, and they would take off their shoes before the branches in order to go right in front of their tent, as if to recall what it's like to have a house in which you need to take your shoes off, not to put sand in the house, but that was sand in the sand. They would also have the same reflex of rubbing their hands as if there was water, and there was no water, to keep the reflex alive of washing your hands when you arrive home. They were, and when I met with them, I questioned them about their experience in the 1992 wars, and they had been in refugee camp for 10 years, and they had children. So there was this new generation growing up in those refugee camps, knowing nothing else but the context of the camp and living off the memories of their parents. So their parents had to talk to them about what's a fire truck, what's a house, what's a living room, and they would keep those memory alive by almost mimicking them on an everyday basis. And of course, the nobility, the dignity of those people was breathtaking. The resilience, of course. What they had done as well is that they would listen to the BBC all day. So they would be very, very informed, so much so that they were able to tell me that they were happy to meet a Canadian, because the Canadian government had prosecuted soldiers that had tortured one Somalis in the 1992 war. And they knew all that, and they would spend their days making school for their children, passing on knowledge and telling them about the world. And that again hinted me on how much others know us and how little we know of them. So these were certainly defining moments. And that's to skip so many encounters with counterintuitive characters that I could maybe say, people that I met that were so fascinating, breaking down so many stereotypes, meeting with this beautiful person who was a military covered in tattoos, but he could actually recite you Baudelaire. So again, unpacking these images and those stereotypes for me are eye-opening moments, and then that I try to bring with me, because I think these are constant reminders that we do have unconscious biases, and our role as researchers is to unpack them, debunk them, and try to unveil all of those stereotypes that we carry on without even knowing it.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences with us. My next question is, as you reflect back on your career so far, what would you say your biggest achievement is?
I think my biggest achievement, which is ongoing, is the creation of bridges, the connection of different types of communities. And by communities, I refer to practitioner communities, researcher communities, bridging students from different institutions. So creating networks, link bridges amongst worlds that don't necessarily talk to each other so often. So to create spaces and carve space for dialogues among different types of communities.
Now talking a bit more about what you're actually doing right now. So from 2018 and until 2020, as part of the United Nations Senior Women Talent Pipeline, which is a project that was designed as a UN initiative to increase the number of women in senior position in UN peace operation. You've played a central role within this project in designing and running real world simulation in Entebbe. Can you tell us a little bit more about the scenario-based training and your experience in Entebbe, Uganda?
Yes, about the involvement in Entebbe. This was such an exciting project. So I'm a non-resident fellow at the International Peace Institute in New York, which is a think tank that does independent research on the UN and different issues on the UN. And in 2018, they started a project for scenario-based training for senior leadership at the UN. And I was asked to develop, design a simulation to engage, to reflect the different issues and challenges for peace operations who engage with host states. So I wrote in 2018, designed and drafted this simulation on a pandemic and how peace operations should adapt to a pandemic situation relative to the host state. I'm really sorry about that. I hope I was not, I have no kind of involvement with the pandemic right now, but I was a bit too realistic to my own taste. In any case, meanwhile, UN Women, along with the Folk Bernadotte Academy, which is an institute in Sweden that is associated with the Ministry of Army, but is also a think tank of research, created a program to facilitate the hiring of women in senior leadership positions at the UN. And they designed a week-long training targeted at women with extensive experience who could be potential candidate for senior leadership roles in UN peacekeeping operations. So this week-long course would cover mandate implementation, what is the UN, what are peace operations, what's the military dimension of peace operations, the police dimensions, how to interact with civilians, how to integrate those three cultures of police, military, and civilians. And at the very end, the idea was for me to come in and to pilot a simulation that would draw on all of the concept, issues, and challenges that would have been covered throughout the year. So I was called upon to take that simulation and run it with the senior leaders at the very end of the course. And of course, that was a very exciting project because, as you may know, I use a lot of simulations in my own classes at Bishop's. And of course, I love it. But it's something to run a simulation with our students and in the context of a course. And with students that are learning about all of those processes, and run a simulation with high profile leaders that have a whole career, not only behind them, but in front of them, but that are very senior in their positions. So I piloted 3 times this simulation. And that was done on the logistic base of the United Nations, which is located in Entebbe, Uganda. There were about 30 women per courses. So far, 90 women went through this simulation for the past 3 years. And what was so interesting, especially for the first time I ran this simulation and piloted the simulation, is that the women that underwent these hour-long simulation had to identify issues to tackle, had to set priorities to implement the mandate. So they were in deep and high-stake discussion in the context of the simulation. But after the first simulation, what came out was that none of these women had mentioned the word gender at all throughout the simulation. And I was quite astonished by that. And we had a discussion with the group after the simulation, and everybody was quite unsettled to realize that they were all women, and none of them had actually highlighted, flagged, identified specifically gender issues related to peace operations. And one of the explanation was maybe because they were women. And they took for granted that that kind of topic would be covered or that approach would be inherent. And that brought about a very deep and interesting discussion on, again, our unconscious biases towards ourselves and towards our work as well. And the question is, as women, do we take for granted that we have a gender approach? And obviously, the answer of do we take a gender approach because we're women is negative. It's not true. Not necessarily. We have to make this extra effort to have a gender approach to different issues, whether you're a male or a female. And so that sparked all types of interesting discussion. And again, the lessons learned by piloting the simulations with those women, I tried to bring back to the classroom and also hone my practice with our students in order to highlight different issues that might come out.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And so in the context of International Women's Day, do you see any barriers for women to succeed as a scholar in the field of international relations? And have you faced any of these barriers yourself?
I would say that the challenges are not limited or not necessarily related to being a woman. And I think here's this keyword now in academia of intersectionality. And I think we need to think about this way of portraying our challenges. Because of course, the challenges will be very different for women, depending on their nationality, their social classes, their sexual orientation, their professional background, their training, and they will not face the same challenge. So if you are what they call visible minority, for example, that is a lesbian, in a military context, certainly that there will be high challenges. If you are a white woman from a privileged social class going into academia, not the same types of challenges. So I think there are challenges associated with different dimensions of our identities, and different challenges will appear depending on which aspect of our identity will be at the forefront of our work.
So now that we addressed some challenges, we have, especially with the pandemic right now, you're working from home. Women are often asked how they maintain both a personal life and a career. Do you think it is a fair question to be asked? And what is your personal experience with that?
I think it's a fair question to be asked, and I was so happy to hear that question addressed to the Ambassador Bob Ray in a conference we had a few weeks ago, where someone asked the ambassador, how do you work out the work-life balance? And that was quite refreshing, because from my experience, this is often a question we ask women and less so for men. I would imagine for many reasons that are seen as objective, for example, the biological clock. So a woman needs to have babies before 40 or 45 or 50, but in any case, until a certain age, after which the time is up. And that's not a reality for men that can actually have children very late in life. So that's not necessarily a time limit. Hence, that's how I usually understand the questions. But in any case, I think it's a fair question to ask everybody. Actually, it's a fair question to ask because it's crucial to to live a fulfilling life, I would imagine, whatever your choice of what is a family means to you. So I'm not necessarily saying that you need to have children, on the contrary, but I think to balance a personal life and a work life is in any case very important, and a question to ask ourselves as well. For my own experience, I was lucky to have a partner who, first of all, understands my work and values my work, and with whom we share at equality family workload and professional workload, and who's very present for me and for our daughters, and allowed me to travel extensively at some point in my career. And that made the whole difference for me, because I had a very supportive partner, who was and I love the word partner, because he is not only a spouse, but certainly a team partner in our endeavors, whether it be our individual professional endeavors that we tackle together as a team, or our family endeavors or professional endeavors. So having a partner that understands your work, and values it, is of course crucial, and for me that made all the difference. And also, I would say that it's wonderful to have the discussions on both my partner's work and my own work with our children, explaining what drives us, our passion. It's not always easy for small children to understand why one of the parents has to go away for travel reasons, but that brings about a lot of very stimulating discussions on what is work, what's the place of work in our family life, what are priorities, what drives us, what sparks passion, and what you put in place in order to balance the well-being of our family unit.
Lastly, we were wondering, what advice do you have for female students who are looking to work in international relations?
I think I will pick up on the question of female students, on the students aspect and academia aspect. And for that particular targeted audience of students, it would be to mobilize what you've learned, what you are learning at university, the theories, the concept, those tools of critical thinking, to mobilize those, to unpack the stereotypes that you might encounter. And I think that's the beauty of doing studies, and the privilege of studying and having critical assessment of what's going on. It's to provide us with the tools to unveil unconscious biases that I was referring to, and to unpack stereotypes, because we will all face stereotypes, and that happens for male and female, and it will always happen. So to mobilize that critical thinking in unpacking images that are projected upon ourselves, or expectations that are put upon ourselves that are burdening us, mobilize those tools of reflection is crucial. Also, in general, I will say that one priority is always self-care and the empowerment of others. And I think those go hand in hand. We empower ourselves by privileging self-care, and empowering others also help going further. It strengthens collaborative work and teamwork, and is quite fulfilling in order to achieve any types of project. I say often, and I'm quoting the words of a wise friend who says that we're never smart alone, and I really believe in that. So empowering others, prioritizing self-care, and unpacking all the stereotypes and unexpected burden is key for thriving in any quest we have.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for answering all of our questions. You are a very successful and inspirational woman, and we are very thankful to have you as a professor in our department.
And I'm so grateful to have students like you. Thank you very much for the interview today.
Thank you.